This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by PlexTrack. The best pen testing begins and ends with PlexTrack. Boost efficiency and effectiveness during every phase and cut reporting time in half. PlexTrack helps consultants, service providers, and enterprises centralize processes, build more consistent reports faster, and deliver superior value. PlexTrack users report an average 20% time savings and 30% increase in efficiency. Learn how to spend more time hacking and less time reporting at www.plextrack.com/thecyberwire. Ukraine holds its first war crimes trial. Are there war crimes in cyberspace? Iranian cyberespionage. Roblox seems to have been used to introduce a backdoor. CISA issues ICS advisories. A Darkweb C2C trader has been sentenced. The last conspirator in the strange case of the eBay newsletter takes a guilty plea. Carole Theriault looks at Google's new approach to cookies in Europe. Our guest is Mary Writz of ForgeRock on the growing importance of mobile device authentication security. And CIA gets a CISO. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Friday, May 13th, 2022. A captured Russian soldier has been placed on trial by Ukrainian authorities for the shooting of a civilian in the early days of the war. He's described variously in the press as a commander, even a tank division commander, but he's a 21-year-old sergeant, a tank commander, which makes him a vehicle operator, barely a leader at all. And note that a sergeant in the Russian army does not have the authority or discretion that sergeants, even young ones, are commonly entrusted with in Western armies. According to Deutsche Welle, the accused soldier's unit was fleeing Ukrainian forces east of Kyiv. His tank disabled, the soldier is said to have fired at, stopped, and stolen a civilian car. As they were driving away seeking safety, the soldier is said to have shot and killed a 62-year-old man to prevent him from revealing their position. The soldier is said to have acknowledged the killing but has yet to enter a plea. He's quoted as saying, "I was ordered to shoot. I shot one round at him, he falls, and we kept on going." It's not known who ordered him to shoot or how the order was received. We open with this discussion because it establishes a context for a movement to hold Russian operators accountable as war criminals for their actions in cyberspace. The casual murder of civilians is obviously a war crime, and waging aggressive war is a recognized crime against peace. But what about cyber attacks? Under what conditions might a cyber operation constitute a war crime? Wired reports that the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley's School of Law has formally requested that the Office of the Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court in The Hague consider prosecuting the GRU's Sandworm Group for war crimes. Those crimes weren't committed during the present war, however. The alleged crimes were the December 2015 targeting of electric utilities in western Ukraine and the 2016 takedown of portions of the grid around Kyiv, affecting hundreds of thousands of civilians. The Human Rights Center is interested in bringing cyberspace under the scope of international law and in securing recognition of cyberspace as a fifth domain of warfare. The GRU's 2 cyber attacks are attractive cases for such purposes because they're well attested and unambiguously attributed. They also had a clear kinetic effect. They disrupted power distribution in portions of Ukraine. And finally, and this is the most important for the laws of armed conflict, the attacks were indiscriminate, not directed against a military target, but instead directed against an essentially civilian population. The extension of international law to cyberspace and the deterrent effect this might have on other state actors are the goals of the Human Rights Center's request. Given that the Sandworm hackers have already been indicted under domestic law, including U.S. law, and have a price on their heads, As far as the individual operators are concerned, an ICC action would amount to making the legal rubble bounce, but the Human Rights Center is seeking to establish a principle. Fortinet describes a spear phishing effort against Jordanian diplomatic targets that was evidently conducted by Iran. The lure is a familiar "please acknowledge receipt of this document, come on," but the payload is more sophisticated than the usual run of criminal phishing. The Excel macro in the fish hook may have been accompanied by anti-analysis features. The malware itself slept for 6 to 8 hours, and the attackers used DNS tunneling for command and control. Their 3 command and control servers were also used unusually intelligently. 2 of them were tightly controlled and were brought up only at specific times. The 3rd server was apparently used for misdirection to make attribution more difficult. Fortinet thinks the campaign was run by APT-34, also known as Helix Kitten, an Iranian government-directed threat group. Another Iranian threat group, APT-35, or Charming Kitten, has been, according to Hacker News, actively conducting ransomware attacks. The activity cluster is tracked by SecureWorks as Cobalt Mirage. 2 series of attacks are reported. One uses BitLocker and Diskcryptor for financial gain. The other, while it also deployed ransomware opportunistically, is directed principally toward gaining access to and collecting intelligence from espionage targets. Avanan reports that a Trojan file hidden within a legitimate scripting engine that's used for cheat code is affecting users of the popular gaming platform Roblox. The tool, Synapse X, installs an executable file that installs library files into the Windows system folder, giving the program the potential to break applications, corrupt or remove data, or send information back to the hacker. Synapse X has legitimate uses, but in this case it's serving as a dropper, and one of the files it's dropping is a backdoor. The evident goal is to use Roblox as a way into networks of interest. It's not simply a hack designed to annoy gamers. CISA yesterday released an unusually large number of industrial control system advisories. The U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Florida has announced the sentencing of Gleb Alexander Ivanov Tolpintsev, a resident of Chernovisty, Ukraine, to 4 years in federal prison for conspiring to traffic in unauthorized access devices and computer passwords. He's also been ordered to forfeit the $82,000 he earned through his crimes. Polish authorities arrested the suspect on October 3, 2020, and subsequently extradited him to the United States. He copped a guilty plea on February 22nd of this year. It's a small but noteworthy blow against the C2C dark web markets. Most of his criminal customers were interested in ransomware attacks and tax fraud. They'll now need to shop elsewhere. Reuters reports that David Harville, formerly eBay's Director of Global Resiliency, has taken a guilty plea to 5 counts of conspiracy and stalking. He is the last of 7 former eBay personnel to admit wrongdoing in the very strange case of stalking. The victims were a mom-and-pop e-commerce newsletter, E-Commerce Bytes, run from Natick, Massachusetts, whose observations about eBay, nothing particularly harsh or out of the ordinary for online reviews, for some reason became a burr under the online auction giant's saddle. The entire affair is very difficult to understand. Were the perpetrators so caught up in the little theater of their imagination that they lost the self-awareness that would have led them to see that what they were doing was criminal? And finally, to turn from crime and end on a high note, congratulations to Rick Bache, CISO at AIG, who has agreed to return to government service. He'll be assuming duties as the Central Intelligence Agency's Chief Information Security Officer and Director of the Office of Cybersecurity. Our best wishes for a successful tour of duty. And now, a word from our sponsor, Axonius. Asset management used to be easy, but things have changed. Now, IT and security teams struggle to manage a complex sprawl of devices, users, cloud services, and SaaS apps. It doesn't have to be this way, though, and that's where Axonius comes in. From June 6th through the 9th, swing by booth 943 in the South Hall at RSA Conference 2022 to say hello to Axonius and goodbye to the old ways of gaining an asset inventory. The Axonius solution correlates asset data from existing solutions to provide an always up-to-date inventory, uncover gaps, and automate action, giving security and IT teams the confidence to control complexity. Visit Axonius at RSA Conference to see the platform in action. Head over to axonius.com/cyberwire-RSAC to learn more. That's axonius.com/cyberwire-RSAC. And we thank Axonius for sponsoring our show. It's fair to say that for many of us, our mobile devices are taking an ever-increasing percentage of the time we spend online, and even tending to day-to-day business tasks. With that being the reality, the security of those devices is of paramount importance. Mary Writz is Vice President of Product Strategy for Consumer Identity at authentication technology provider ForgeRock.
21% of millennials open one of their mobile apps 50 times a day. The rest of us open them up about 11 times a day. But our lives are just moving online, and organizations are more susceptible to cyber attacks as they shift their operations to adjust to that digital world.
So where do we stand in terms of what's available to us in terms of, authentication on those mobile devices?
So you basically have two options if you want to make it more secure than just a username and password. So you can go with MFA, or you can go with true passwordless authentication. Both of those will reduce your risk about 99.9% of the attacks. The big attacks are account takeover attempts, phishing, man-in-the-middle of attacks type thing, MFA and passwordless. And there's some pros and cons with those.
Well, let's dig into each of those. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, MFA is the most understood. MFA as a countermeasure, it doesn't reduce the likelihood of an attack, but it lowers the impact of phishing, brute force, credential stuffing. And so when you think about MFA, think about one-time passcodes to your cell phone or your email, or like a push notification that comes into your phone. So these are things that validate that you really are who you say you are.
And then in terms of, biometric verifications, I think most of us are familiar with things like Face ID or Touch ID and the equivalents on the various platforms.
Yeah, biometrics are becoming much more popular, and they're great because the form factor is so easy to use. What's interesting is the security under the hood when you use them can vary from mobile application to mobile application. So the premier gold standard is FIDO WebAuthn, which is where you can remove, passwords altogether.
And in terms of that being available to people, where do we stand?
It's ubiquitous in its support in both the device and the browser. And again, it's the strongest form of authentication, and it's a really nice form factor. It's just your face or your finger. The adoption is coming along. It's increasing. But I will say, when it comes to adding authentication that's both safe and simple, different demographics have different preferences. So I think what we see enterprises doing right now is kind of defaulting to MFA and starting to move closer and closer to passwordless over time by first introducing it as an option.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so for those folks who are out there who are app developers who are looking to include these sorts of things in the programs that they're working on, how should they go about doing that? I mean, what are your recommendations?
It's a great question because authentication is something that's really important to get right. And it's hard to make sure all of your app developers understand the intricacies and nuance of how authentication works. So the easiest way, is to use a vendor like ForgeRock who can provide an SDK to embed those options into your application really easy. So then you could embed your MFA options or a passwordless option right into your app, just being assured that it's installed and configured the right way.
There's a lot of talk about supply chain issues. And so, I suppose there's there's give and take there, right? I mean, on the one hand, you can trust a third party to provide that service for you, but on the other hand, now you need to be concerned about what they're doing behind the scenes themselves.
Yeah, the supply chain right now is currently the weakest link. And when we look at a lot of these attacks, MFA was not in place, and MFA would have dramatically improved. So that's a first place to look. And it needs to be a part of the requirement when you look at your supply chain. You need to require that they use MFA in order to authenticate into your systems at very minimum.
That's Mary Writz from ForgeRock. There's a lot more to this conversation. If you want to hear more, head on over to CyberWire Pro and sign up for Interview Selects, where you get access to this and many more extended interviews. And now, a word from our sponsor, Collide. Collide sends employees important, timely, and relevant security recommendations for their Linux, Mac, and Windows devices right inside Slack. Collide is perfect for organizations that care deeply about compliance and security, but don't want to get there by locking down devices to the point where they become unusable. Instead of frustrating your employees, Collide educates them about security and device management while directing them to fix important problems. You can try Collide with all its features on an unlimited number of devices for free for 14 days, no credit card required. Try it out at collide.com/cyberwire daily. That's KOLIDE.com/cyberwire daily. Enter your email when prompted to receive your free Collide gift bundle after trial activation. And we thank Collide for sponsoring our show. You may have noticed that after the GDPR went into effect, we all started seeing more pop-ups regarding website cookie policies. Whether or not that's a direct effect of GDPR is arguable, but there's no doubt cookies play an important role in online privacy. So when Google announced they were updating their approach to handling cookies in the EU, that caught the attention of our own Carole Theriault.
Last month, Google announced changes on how it makes use of cookies in Europe. You listeners outside Europe might not know this, but for more than a decade, if you visited a website from Europe, you would typically see a cookie consent banner. Now, cookies, as we know, help sites remember information about your previous visits. So they can do things like display text in your preferred language, deliver stuff appropriate to your geography, remember previous actions. They grease the wheels during a service request. The problem is that it caused a bit of a privacy fracas. What if you as a user don't want a website to grab this info without your consent? And over a decade ago, Europe agreed, and the European Cookie Consent Banner was born and mandated, meaning that when a European-based user opened a website, they had to be presented with a choice to allow or deny the cookies from tracking them. And Google complied. Well, kinda. Google allowed users to accept all tracking cookies with a single click, but it forced people to click through various menus to reject them all. Basically, they had greased the wheels for acceptance and made it complicated and annoying for those that wanted to block the cookies. This asymmetry was unlawful, said CNIL, France's data protection agency, steering users into accepting cookies to the ultimate benefit of Google's advertising business. It was so awful that CNIL fined Google 150 million euros, or $170 million, for deploying confusing language in cookie banners. $170 million may sound like a steep fine, but it is really a teeny tiny drop in Google's financial ocean. Yet, they decided to play ball. To remedy this, writes Google on its blog, Google's new cookie banner gives clear, balanced choices: reject all, accept all, or more options. This new menu will appear on Google Search and YouTube if users are not signed into an account. We've kicked off the launch in France, and we will be extending this experience across the rest of the European Economic Area, the UK and Switzerland, wrote Google in a blog post announcing the changes. Now, between you and me, Google is a pretty big fish, but there are quite a few other sizable fish out there that have followed in Google's data snarfling shoes and are currently massaging their cookie banners to obfuscate the reject all options. To you, I say take heed. It is only a matter of time before you are in the EU's data protection headlights. And the fine may not seem like chump change to you. This was Carole Theriault for the CyberWire.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, CyberReason. Ransomware shouldn't feel inevitable. You should feel invincible. CyberReason is undefeated against ransomware with the only predictive ransomware protection available. It's the ultimate defense against ransomware. Visit cyberreason.com to learn more. Thank you also to our friends at RSA Conference, where the world talks security. Through global events and year-round content, RSAC connects you to cybersecurity leaders and cutting-edge ideas for a safer, more secure future. Learn more at rsaconference.com/cyberwire22. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Don't miss this weekend's Research Saturday and my conversation with Dr. Mei Wang from Palo Alto Networks. We're discussing their research, Know Your Infusion Pump Vulnerabilities and Secure Your Healthcare Organization. That's Research Saturday. Do check it out. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Rachel Gelfand, Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karp, Eliana White, Puru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carole Theriault, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. And now, a word from our sponsor, CyberReason. They're out there, and they're coming for you. Ransomware attackers, sophisticated criminal armies bringing organizations to their knees and costing companies millions. But ransomware shouldn't feel inevitable. You should feel invincible. CyberReason is undefeated in the fight against ransomware with the only predictive ransomware protection available, automatically stopping attacks before encryption and empowering security teams with full visibility. It's the ultimate protection against ransomware, an AI-powered defense that defeats ransomware at every stage of the attack, stopping today's threats and ready for tomorrow's. True cyber defense designed for true defenders. Because ransomware won't define this era, those who defeat it will. Visit cyberreason.com to learn more. That's cybereason.com. And we thank CyberReason for sponsoring our show.